So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar session. It's great to see so many people connected with us. It's with great joy that we're here to talk about logosophy and how it can help us in searching for the true meaning of life. Before we start today's presentation, I'd like to inform you, just in case you want to attend further activities, watch past activities, or get in touch with us, to know more about logosophy, at the end of this presentation, we will offer you our email and show some directions on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as a QR code to contact us. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tobias Pulgaro. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm a dentist, and I'm currently living and working in the United Kingdom, in Manchester. I have been studying logosophy for the last 4 years. Logosophy is a science focused on the conscious evolution of the human being and all that entails. The science was created in Cordoba, Argentina, by the Argentinian thinker, educator, and humanist González Pecotti back in 1930, which just completed 90 years. Although it started in Argentina, today it has several cultural centers throughout the world, where students gather to deepen their understanding of this study and participate in study activities. These cultural centers are more than just a physical place, as they offer an experimental ground that is very favorable to the study and practice, as well as to exchange of opinions between the students. Logosophy also possesses a unique pedagogy where we can find many logosophical schools in countries such as Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, where many generations of students have benefited from its teaching method. It's important to know that Logosophical Foundation is a privately owned institution without any lucrative political and religious goals. Logosophy is a practical science where the main field of experimentation is life itself. It allows us to take control of our own life, understanding our experience we live in a new light. Today, we shall hear Ursula, a logosophy student and also instructor, living in Barcelona, Spain, where is located the European Cultural Center of Logosophy, and she's going to talk about the topic, searching for the true meaning of life.
Thank you, Tobias. Good evening, everyone. It's a great joy to be here today to share a little bit of my experience with logosophy with you. Just a little background on me. My name is Ursula Melo. I'm originally from Brazil as well, but I've been living in Spain since 2013. I moved here for my graduate studies. I did my master and my PhD in economics in Madrid. And now I am a researcher and a professor of economics at the Barcelona Graduate School of Economics. And most importantly, I've been studying logosophy since 2015. And let's get started on today's topics. I want to say that if you have any questions during the presentation, you could put it on the chat. Then maybe later we can answer you either in the webinar or we can contact you by mail, okay? So I chose this image to start with because since I was a child, I have always enjoyed looking at the cosmos because it used to give me a feeling of immensity, of freedom, and the conviction that nothing is impossible. When I was little, this courage that used to arise within me was transformed into many questions. And some of those questions I want to share with you today. They were, for example, what is the meaning of human life? What is the purpose of my life in particular? Why am I here? What do I have to do? Did you have the same questions when you were kids, or do you still have these questions? Those questions really stimulated me. I sensed that there was an answer. I looked at the universe. I sensed there was an answer to these questions. But at that moment of my life, I couldn't answer them with security or conviction. When I was a teenager, I started to think more about those questions. And then I started to ask some adults around me. And it was interesting because I saw that there were more or less 3 different types of questions, of answers. There was a group that would, the most skeptical ones, they would say that life did not have a specific meaning, that everything in the universe just happened by chance, and that everything, human life even, was just a result of many random processes of the universe. And I think that this is actually the most common view still in the scientific world where I work. And that there was also this other group that would say just the opposite, that everything has a reason, that like every process of life, everything happened for a reason. Even the life of every human being had a specific reason, but that it was not possible to know this for sure. It was like, oh, there is a reason, but you can't know for sure. And you just need to have faith. I remember that none of these 2 answers made sense for me or gave me confidence. But there was this third group that offered an answer that at that moment made more sense to me. It was a simpler answer that some adults would just say, well, the meaning of life, the goal of life is to be happy, is to find happiness. So I decided not to side with chance or with faith, but at that moment, I decided that, well, maybe the meaning of life is to find happiness. So now, like at that moment, I knew that the meaning of life was to find happiness. So I got this meaning and I tried to think about what this meant for me. And then I started to ask myself, what do I need to be happy? If the meaning of life is to find happiness, what do I need to be happy? So at that moment, I realized that happiness for me, I could find happiness if I had 2 things, like broadly. On one side, I wanted to have professional success and satisfaction. So I wanted to find a job that I liked and in which I could use my skills, my resources, things that I was good at to help humanity, to help construct the society. So I began to try to achieve this success, to build a respectful position in my career, in my profession. And on the other side, I also needed personal success and satisfaction. So I wanted to cultivate friendships and to then start building a family in the future. Up to here, everything normal, right? I think those are 2 aspirations of most of the human beings. But of course, this is much easier to imagine than to actually achieve. But in the pursuit of that image, I adjusted my whole life and I started to construct this image that I had built for myself. I faced, of course, many external difficulties. I had to adjust many things in order to improve myself to carry out that project. And some years and many difficulties later that were part of that path that I had projected for myself, at some point I looked inside. I stopped and I looked inside. But then when I did that, I realized that the more I advanced in the pursuit of that image of happiness that I had constructed for myself, the less happy I felt. But I could not understand why. Some years later, I've started studying, some time later, some months later, maybe I've started studying logosophy. And logosophy taught me a new way of life, new concepts, which were essential for me to start to understand that puzzle, that confusing mental state, that paradox that I was facing. So I thought, right, if the goal of life is to find happiness, and if I have this image of what happiness means for me, why could I not feel happy even after advancing on the path of what happiness means to me, right? It was very difficult for me to understand this at that moment. But with the logosophical study, I started little by little to penetrate into that mystery for me. And naturally, little by little, with a calmer mind, after an initial work with the logosophical method, what happened was really interesting because I felt again the awakening of those initial questions of my childhood, which were dormant at that time, but that woke up. Those are the questions again. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of my life in particular? Why am I here? Why? What do I have to do with my life? At that moment, with logosophy, for the first time, I found an answer that were different from those ones that I had encountered during my adolescence. And I wanna read to you a fragment from a logosophical book that gave me a hint to that answer. And it is: logosophy includes two powerful forces, which when they unite and bond, lead man to accomplish the two aims of his existence: to evolve toward perfection and to constitute himself as a real contributor to humanity. One of these factors is the cognition that it offers to the human mind, and the other is the affection that teaches how to fulfill human hearts. So, in other words, according to this fragment of this logosophical book, the two aims, the two purposes of existence are to evolve toward perfection and to become a real contributor to humanity. But what about happiness, right? I asked myself. I think they forgot about it. That was my first answer. But that really caught my attention. This was different than what I thought about when I thought about this meaning of life before. I didn't think about this. So this caught my attention. But also logosophy teaches that you shouldn't believe in what you read. You should experiment in your own life. So I decided that I wanted to experience this because for me at least, this was very interesting. So the first goal of existence, according to logosophy, is to evolve toward perfection. And what does it mean, right? To evolve toward perfection. What is perfection after all? Does it exist? And then there is another fragment of a logosophical book that says, perfection means the elimination of everything imperfect and to understand that imperfections are the result of ignorance and total lack of superior cognitions. Perfection means something more. It is the gradual improvement by the individual of his conditions. Look how interesting. Perfection for logosophy is not something unattainable. It is a process of gradual improvement of internal conditions in which little by little, we are able to eliminate our weaknesses and imperfections through the only possible way, through knowledge. So I looked at myself. What do I want to improve, right? Many things, but one of the great imperfections or weaknesses that I wanted to improve was the lack of confidence in myself or in my own resources. That was not something very obvious. So people who knew me would probably say, oh, no, this girl is confident. But that's not how I felt. Although I always looked for challenges, for changes, for new things in my life. For example, I moved countries when I was 22 in order to pursue my master and my PhD. But internally, I didn't feel confident. And many times the reason why I wanted to push myself to do more things and to find new challenges was exactly because I couldn't feel confident inside. When things were calmer in my external environment, when I should feel serene, I actually felt the opposite. I felt some empty inside. I felt this, that something was missing, and then I had always to be struggling to achieve something more to avoid looking inside of myself. So, I mean, this lack of self-confidence was something that I wanted to change in me, was one of the big things that I wanted to improve. One of these features of these internal conditions that I wanted to improve in myself created obstacles for me. And one interesting thing is that this process, as this fragment of the book says, it's something gradual. It happens little by little. And now I want to use an image to illustrate more or less how this gradual process is happening and has been happening for me in this past almost 6 years that I've been studying logos. This is an image of the anatomy of the Earth, and I'm going to use it to explain about how I've been enjoying and living this process of getting to know the anatomy of my internal being. So the most superficial layer of the Earth, the blue part, is the crust. And this is, I think, in this analogy, this would be equivalent of our physical bodies, like the part we can touch. It's the most external layer, the layer we can see. But if we penetrate inside the planet, below the crust, there is this red layer that is called the mantle. So it's this extensive, fluid, very active layer made of magma, which is this molten mass of rocks that is expelled by the volcanoes. And in logosophy, when I started penetrating inside of myself, but like not my physical body, this metaphysical body, when I looked within, I also found this very extensive, fluid, and active layer, but of course not made of magma, but made of my thoughts. And I can call this layer my mind. So this mantle is inside of me, it's my mind. And in this first inner layer of my being, I began to work. I realized that just as the mantle of the Earth contains magma that generates big explosions by the volcanoes, I had thoughts that inside of me moved energies that were also super powerful, and if they were not channeled properly, they also generated big explosions that would lead me to be impulsive, for example, in many situations. But I also learned that I could work with my thoughts. So I started observing my mind and understanding that, well, I had thoughts that are positive and that I can reinforce. And I have thoughts that are negative, they are not useful, that I can try to eliminate. I also start to see that I could have this big imagination that would create all the worst case scenarios possible for every situation. And I had the power in my imagination. And this was very important, but because it got so much of my energy, and every time that I could control my imagination, I could finally observe, I could finally think, I could finally get back the control of my own mind. I also understood that when I started balancing better these thoughts, understanding better how this works, I could actually gradually adapt my temper, for example. I could oscillate less, could become more balanced. And little by little, I started to feel more balanced, both psychologically and energetically, by getting to know better these thoughts. So, I mean, in short, I started to know and to work with this first layer of my inner being, this, which I call my mind, like this first big layer of myself. And also very importantly, when I started working with my thoughts, I started little by little to feel more confident. I started to feel that I was more in power I had more power about everything that happened inside of me. Okay. But when we look at this, below this red part, below the mantle, there is another layer of planet Earth, which is called the core. It is a layer of higher temperature, of more solid materials. And I also discovered that when I looked inside of me, below this big layer of thoughts, below my temperament, there was also this other layer of me. It was also a layer that gave me more solidity, more stability. It is my sensibility. I discovered that only when I managed to organize my first layer a little bit, to organize my thoughts, to move beyond my thoughts, to penetrate beyond my thoughts, I could then start touching my sensibility and start working on that too. Then I was able to penetrate and to touch this deeper part of me. So my core is what I call my, like what we call my sensibility. So I began to get to know better my sensibility. I saw that when I listened to my sensibility, it worked like a radar. So I started to recognize that my sensibility works like this internal radar, and that this radar would, when I started to listen to this radar, I could then identify through the movements of my sensibility different paths that I could take through my intuition. And it was interesting because before, even though I had them, I mean, of course, I've always had a sensibility, but I couldn't grasp it. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't hear it because the thoughts in my mind were so active. They were so predominant in my mind that I couldn't understand what my sensibility would indicate. And I couldn't hear it. It existed, but I couldn't hear it. And I also understood that I not only had a sensibility that would indicate many things for me, that I could also, I could make it stronger. I could cultivate the sensibility. For example, I could consciously cultivate virtues that I did not have before, such as patience, for example. I also could cultivate superior feelings, such as gratitude, such as love for life. And when I consciously started doing this, I also started to feel more confidence and more security in myself, because then I had an inner radar that would indicate paths that would be more in line with what I truly wanted. And then Earth, as you can see, below the core, like there is this still inner part of Earth that is called the inner core. So this is the central layer of Earth, which a temperature as high as the sun, and with a pressure that is so high that, so because of the high temperature, the nickel and the iron they should be liquid, but because of the high temperature, they're actually solid. So this is the most consistent, the most dense and solid layer of planet Earth. And continuing the analogy with myself, I realized, I saw that when I started working with my mind, then with my sensibility. When I started organizing these two systems, these two parts of me a little bit better, I also discovered that there was something more inside of me. There was an even deeper, more real, purer part of me. And little by little, I started to reach my inner core. A part of me that also gave me more consistency, more solidity, that gave me a lot of energy, a lot of power that I didn't know I had before. And this is actually the part that sustained my whole being. And this is what I call, it's my inner core. It is my spiritual part. But you can call whatever you want, my essence, my eternal, my divine part. I like to call it my spiritual part. And first, I realized that first I had to recognize that I had this. Like I had this truer, this more fundamental part of me that I didn't know that I had before. And then I then connected and I started to realize that those questions that I had in childhood, they were actually, they came from this more essential part of me. That feeling of power, of immensity, of the feeling that nothing is impossible that I had when I was a child, it also came from that inner core of myself. And it was interesting because then with logosophy, I started little by little to reach that pure and truer part of me that would also make me feel, again, this freedom, but now in a conscious way. And then I also realized that this part, my spiritual part, does not only need to be recognized, but it needs to be nurtured. And the only way to nurture my spiritual part is through knowledge, is through a process of conscious evolution that logosophy teaches me how to do. And then I understood that little, by doing this process of evolution, by evolving toward perfection, I can little by little find within myself, like start to feel more true, right? And then to start feeling more confident, more, I realized that this lack of confidence was this complete lack of, I didn't know that I had this more fundamental part. And when I little by little started through this process to contact with this most fundamental part of me, I started little by little to feel confident again. And when I started, like, this is an image to illustrate a little bit how I have been living this process of getting to know myself better, this process of evolution, of evolving towards perfection. Then from this, naturally, it came for me a comprehension of this second goal of existence according to logosophy, which is to become a true contributor to humanity. I also asked myself, what does it mean, right? To be a true contributor to humanity, how can I become one? But then by logic, it followed that if I have a spiritual part, a divine part inside of me, I understood that every human being also has a spiritual part. And I understood that the more connected I feel with my spiritual part, naturally, I also feel more connected to others. So in practical terms, I understood that it makes me more empathic, more understanding, more capable of becoming this true collaborator, this true contributor of humanity. Also with this knowledge, gradual knowledge, I'm still in the process, okay, of getting to know this, my spiritual part, I also started to feel more aware of the goods that I receive daily. My health, my family, this beautiful planet, multiple kind gestures of people every day. By becoming aware, conscious of all these goods, naturally it comes from within me, this necessity, this willingness to extend this good to other people. But how? How can I extend this good? The way I understand it is that the only way to really like extend this goods is by creating a true bond with other human beings in order to understand their specific needs and to understand how to collaborate with each individual in particular by trying to help each person specifically to acquire their own capacities to be self-sufficient and like in their time, in their conditions. And for example, I've been trying to practice to become this true contributor of humanity in my own family, in my own home. So I have a younger sister, and a while ago she came to me for advice because she had a very difficult career decision to make. I felt very happy that my sister wanted to talk to me. And I had some hours before our talk on the phone, and I started to prepare myself internally to give her the best elements that I could give. I wanted to give my very best for her. And then consciously, I decided that in no way I would tell her what to do or like tell her what I would do in her place. I didn't want to do that. I did not want to take away from her the freedom and the responsibility to decide for herself, to make an important decision for her life. I wanted her to make it and to feel responsible for it, for good or for bad, right? What I did was to bring questions to make her think, reflections. I asked her about her intuition, about how she felt, about how she felt about this different path that she could take. I encouraged her to make a brave decision that goes a lot beyond the list of pros and cons that we were used to do since childhood. And I think this is a very small example, but it was very meaningful to me because I did it consciously. And for logosophy, contributing to humanity means collaborating with other human beings so that each human being can little by little follow a process of conscious evolution, a gradual improvement of their internal conditions. So each human being can little by little become more conscious. So each one of us can little by little get in contact with our spiritual parts. So because we all have it. I want to read this extract because it's very meaningful to me too. It says, today, more than ever before, humanity needs conscious human beings who can think and think well, to teach others to do the same so that peace and happiness that was lost could be restored to mankind. So I'm going to start concluding. So by experiencing in my own life what logosophy taught about the objectives of existence, I was also able to little by little, as I said, with confidence just to answer those questions that I had posed for me since childhood. I was able to gradually understand and to experiment in my life that evolving towards perfection and being this true contributor to humanity were very great objectives, but that I could in reality put them into practice every day in my own life. I came to understand that the more I adapted my daily tasks, my behavior, my daily life to these great goals, the more confident I felt. And then I started to understand with this great conviction that my life was not something random, without objective, without meaning, but also that it wasn't something that I just need to have faith on. Quite the opposite. I watched it as an spectator emerge from within myself this great conviction that I existed for a reason, and that I could prove this reason, feel this reason. If I could do this inside of me through this process of conscious evolution. And that great reason is to evolve towards perfection, to be a contributor to humanity. But those two great reasons, they must obey a specific purpose that me and only me, that I have to find every day in my daily life. I have to transform these two big goals into daily tasks. This is very challenging, but also very, very satisfying. And today I understand that this is something that every human being can do, right? To transform these two big goals of existence, to materialize this into daily tasks in order to find meaning in life. And after all that process in my life, after advancing so much in this understanding of what the true meaning of life is for logosophy and for me, I still needed to understand a little piece of the puzzle. If you remember, I had a question before. What about happiness? If happiness is not a goal of life, right? It doesn't say happiness. It says evolving toward perfection and being a contributor to humanity. But if happiness is not a goal of life, then what is happiness? When I came into contact with that fragment of that book that spoke about those two goals of existence and said nothing about happiness, if you remember, my first reaction was to think, oh, they forgot about it. Happiness must be a goal. But some years later, now when I review this experience, I now understand perfectly why happiness is not a goal of life. When at age more or less 16, I thought that happiness was the one true goal of life, then I created an image about what happiness meant to me. And then I started building my life around this image that I had created for myself. But the construction of that image did not make me happy. It was only when I stopped to look for happiness as a goal and I started searching for something else, searching for wisdom, for knowledge, searching for the true goals of life, like practicing this daily evolution towards perfection, practicing how to be a contributor to humanity. When I stopped searching for happiness and I started searching for these true goals, practicing these true goals more than searching for them, that's when I started to feel happiness. But that was a very different kind of happiness. It wasn't just pleasure or momentary joy. It was a broader, a purer, a much more permanent happiness. And all that experience in the end made me understand that true happiness can only be found with the search for the true objectives of existence. Not with the search, but with the practice of these two great objectives of existence. That then happiness is indeed not a goal per se, but the result of a life lived with purpose, a life lived with meaning. And to end, I just want to read a final extract of a philosophical book that says, happiness is not a moment, 2 or 3, in which you enjoy something beautiful, something that attracts and leads the being to feel a blissful moment. No. Happiness must interpenetrate the whole being, all life, and that happiness must be conquered gradually. Happiness should feel like life itself feels, and one can only feel true happiness when through knowledge they find within that immense horizon of possibilities that they are capable of doing very great things. Things that they didn't even have a suspicion, not a vague idea how to do before. And nothing, I repeat, can create happiness like knowledge. Knowledge is the only thing that can give true happiness to a human being. Because it's the only thing that fixes happiness, that makes it permanent, and that makes one feel the beats of eternity. The rest is ephemeral. It is temporary. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to finish with an invitation. So as I said many times, logosophy says that you must not believe in anything, that you should practice, that you should experiment. So my invitation is for you to experiment. So also, I want to invite you to also ask yourself those questions, ask yourself the big questions. And what I can say is that logosophy does not give you answers, does not give you quick answers at least, but it offers a method and a safe path that would allow you to find within yourself the answers to any question that you might possibly have. So thank you very much. And I will pass along to Tobias again for the final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. Thank you very much for your great presentation. I'm sure many of us were somehow touched with this experience that you just brought. At some point in our life, in my perspective, we as humans ask ourselves for answers about our existence, right? Am I wrong? At least it seems to be that it's just part of our nature to make questions such as, what's the meaning of human life? What's the purpose of my life? For sure, it's not easy to answer that. For sure, it's not. I myself came up with these questions in my mind and many others several times. It's feeling like that I was kind of lost, right? Probably you felt like the same way. The good thing is when we come up with questions like, what do I have to do? We can, in a practical way, answer that. Fortunately, Logosophy gives us many elements and tools based in our own knowledge, exactly like Ursula showed us in a brilliant way, how she searched and found her true meaning of life. I myself found many answers for my own individual questions. The thing is that there's no ready recipe. The only way to answer that is just studying about myself, yourself, right? You could see that it took like a long time for Ursula to realize that she was what was the meaning of her life, and everyone has its own way. In short, when I mentioned about it's not easy to answer questions about our existence. Actually, after I started studying logosophy, everything became much easier and everything started to make sense for me, just like Ursula did in her own way, right? So she brought, provided during this activity many insights and research she could count on, which you can all read, and extensive bibliography, which you can download for free. This is all for free in many languages, in Portuguese, Spanish, you have in German, you have in French, and others. Accessing our webpage, Logosophy. And you can also reach us through social media like Instagram, Facebook, and also on YouTube. If you like to request a meeting to get to know more about logosophy, we are also providing the following QR code. Please, you're more than invited to contact us. Just to conclude, I'd like to thank you all for being here, and I hope I will see you soon in the logosophical environment. So good night, everyone, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see many of you soon.